They dragged him down the aisle as if he'd broken a law, not because of what he'd done, but because of what he looked like. No questions asked, no dignity given, just the scraping sound of his cane along the floor and the heavy silence of passengers who knew it was wrong but kept their eyes forward. He didn't argue. He didn't cry out. He simply stared straight ahead as they pulled him from a seat he had every right to occupy, a seat he had paid for. They claimed it wasn't his, not because of a technical issue, but because he didn't fit the image they expected in that part of the plane. They called it a system glitch, said he must have been mistakenly assigned to first class. But what they didn't realize, what they never imagined, was that the man they were forcing out wasn't just some anonymous traveler. This wasn't someone whose story would end with a silent shuffle to the back. No, the truth was still cruising at altitude, waiting to land with force. This is not just a story. It's the beginning of a reckoning, a revelation of what happens when arrogance and prejudice collide with the wrong man at 35,000 feet. A man who had spent his entire career designing the very systems now being weaponized against him. A man who didn't fight back with fury, but with something far stronger, his legacy. If that opening hit you, stay with us. Before we lift off, drop a comment. Have you ever seen something like this happen? Would you have spoken up? Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about fairness, power, and what justice in the sky really looks like. The afternoon sun painted amber streaks across the runway as Walter Briggs stepped onto Flight 928. In one hand, he held a cane of dark wood. In the other, a simple, weathered leather bag. At a glance, he could have been mistaken for any older man traveling home. His back slightly hunched, each step measured with care. His coat was neatly buttoned, though fraying slightly at the cuffs. A modest fedora sat low on his brow, shading eyes full of memory and meaning. But there was something unmistakable in his presence, a quiet strength, an unspoken authority in the way he moved, each motion deliberate, his dignity tucked into every gesture. When Walter reached the first-class cabin, he stopped to check his ticket against the seat numbers. He found his place by the window, eased down into the plush seat, slid his bag underneath, and rested both hands gently atop his cane. He exhaled with intention, bracing for a long flight, unaware that peace would be the one thing denied to him. That peace shattered as the sound of sharp heels cut through the hush of boarding. Natalie Cross, the lead flight attendant, entered the cabin with the precision of someone used to control. She was known for her poise and her very particular ideas of who did or didn't belong in the premium section. When her eyes landed on Walter sitting among the tailored suits and branded luggage, her face shifted. She didn't frown, not outright, but her gaze sharpened with quiet disapproval. Like the very sight of him was a disruption to the first-class aesthetic. She approached swiftly, her lips forming a smile so thin it barely held. "Sir," she said, her tone wrapped in professionalism but laced with frost. "This area is for priority passengers only. May I see your boarding pass?" Walter looked up, not startled, just a little weary. He moved slowly, reaching into his inner coat pocket, then held out his ticket without saying a word. She plucked it from his hand, barely glanced at it for more than a few seconds, and let out a dry little hum of doubt. "That's strange," she murmured loudly enough for others nearby to hear. "Looks like your seat might have been reallocated. I'll need to move you." Her words floated out, cold and clinical. A businessman one row across glanced over. A woman further back paused mid-page of her magazine, listening now. Walter remained composed. "My pass says 1A," he said, his voice low but steady. "Booked directly. Non-refundable." Natalie didn't flinch. "Yes, well, we had an executive upgrade come in last minute. The system reshuffled a few reservations to accommodate. You've been reassigned further back." She handed him the ticket with a rehearsed finality, offering no space for discussion. Walter held the pass for a beat, then met her gaze. "The system moved my seat," he repeated, as if testing the idea out loud. She nodded. "That's correct, sir. If you'll come with me, I'll take you to your new one." Without waiting, she turned and walked down the aisle. Walter stood, collected his things, and followed. His steps slow, his shoulders straight. But the damage had already begun. "Follow me," Natalie said sharply, not looking back to see if he could keep up. She walked briskly down the aisle with purpose in her stride, her heels tapping like punctuation. Walter Briggs gathered his cane and modest leather bag, then rose from the seat with slow precision. Despite the insult, he kept his posture upright, shoulders squared with quiet dignity. As they made their way through the aircraft, the cabin filled with an unspoken tension. Heads turned subtly, whispers rippled down the rows like leaves rustling in suspicion. Did he really think that seat was for him? One man mumbled under his breath. Maybe he just got lost, someone else offered, voice dripping with false innocence. Walter said nothing. He kept walking, the soft tap-tap of his cane the only sound he made, a steady rhythm of endurance echoing against the cold metal and silence of strangers. Natalie stopped just before the economy section and pointed stiffly to a cramped seat in the middle of row 27. "Right here, sir," she said curtly. "Once we're in the air, I'll get you a glass of water." Walter looked at the narrow seat, gave the smallest nod, and lowered himself into it without complaint. Natalie turned on her heel and disappeared without a backward glance. From near the dividing curtain, a young flight attendant named Jamie Lynn watched the exchange unfold. Her brows furrowed. "Are you sure he wasn't supposed to be in first class?" she asked, her voice quiet, uncertain. Natalie scoffed, brushing off the question. "The only place he belongs is wherever his fare matches. Let's not get sentimental." Jamie opened her mouth as if to argue, but caught herself. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she turned away. In 27E, Walter placed his cane gently across his lap, leaned back into the stiff cushion, and stared out the window. The fall from first class hadn't broken his body, but the weight of it still lingered in his bones. It wasn't about the seat. It was about the unspoken message. "You don't belong here." His joints ached from the abrupt movement, but he didn't complain. He didn't ask for help. He simply stayed still, letting the world pretend he didn't exist. And they did. All except one. Jamie passed by again, her eyes catching the way his fingers gripped the armrest. She slowed, unsure if she should say something. But before she could act, a sharp voice cracked through the aisle like a whip. "Mr. Briggs." Natalie had returned, this time with 2 ground agents in reflective vests trailing behind her. Her posture was rigid, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I need you to come with us." Walter blinked once, slowly, then looked up with calm but tired eyes. "You already reassigned me. I'm in my seat now. Is there an issue?" His voice was calm, but something inside it carried the strain of pain buried too long. Natalie stepped closer, her fake courtesy gone. "You were never cleared to board under a first-class booking," she announced. There are questions surrounding your identity and ticket status. We'll need you to step off the aircraft for verification." The two men behind her shifted, just enough to show they were ready to act. "That won't be necessary," Walter replied, his grip firm around the cane. "My documents are valid. My ticket was confirmed. You're welcome to review it." She cut him off. "Sir, you're now refusing to follow crew instruction. If you continue, this becomes a federal matter." Gasps and murmurs trickled through the rows. A teenager across the aisle raised her phone, pointing the camera discreetly. A man, 2 rows back, leaned in and whispered to his wife, "What's happening?" "He doesn't look like a threat." Walter remained seated, unmoved. "I'm not refusing," he said evenly. "I'm asking for clarity before being removed." Again. Natalie stepped in close, her face inches from his. Her voice dropped to a venomous hiss only he could hear. "You don't get to question us. You get up, or you get dragged." Then she nodded toward the ground staff. "Remove him." One of them hesitated. "Ma'am, he's clearly an elderly passenger." Natalie's glare hardened. "Now." Reluctantly, they stepped forward. One reached for his arm, the other for his bag. As soon as they touched him, Walter's body flinched, not from rebellion, but from a memory written in muscle and scar. His cane slipped from his grip and clattered to the floor. His leg buckled. He crumpled down to one knee, releasing a strained groan. Gasps echoed from the passengers. "Jesus," someone muttered. "Help him," another voice called out. Walter tried to steady himself, but the angle was wrong. One of the crew's hands on his shoulder only unbalanced him more. Natalie didn't move. "Keep going," she said, cold as the cabin's recycled air. "We don't have time for performances." "Follow me," Natalie Cross instructed crisply, turning on her heel without so much as a backward glance to see if the elderly man could keep pace. Walter Briggs rose with quiet effort, collected his cane and his bag, and moved down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. Though the sting of humiliation burned beneath his skin, his posture remained upright, each stride wrapped in the resolve of someone who had endured worse. Around him, the air thickened. Eyes flicked his way, some darting away in guilt, others lingering in judgment. Whispered assumptions trailed behind him like smoke. Was he actually seated up there? A man muttered. Maybe he got lost, someone else replied. Walter said nothing. The only sound he made was the soft, steady rhythm of his cane tapping against the cabin floor. Natalie stopped beside a narrow row in the back of the plane. Seat 19B, squeezed between 2 worn armrests, half shadowed by the lavatory light. She gestured toward it with professional detachment. "Here you are, sir. Once we're in the air, I'll make sure you get some water." Walter glanced at the tight space, nodded once, and lowered himself in without protest. Natalie turned and strode away, never once looking back. At the curtain dividing sections, Jenna Hale, a younger flight attendant, had watched the entire exchange. Her brow furrowed as she leaned slightly toward Natalie and asked quietly, "Are you sure he wasn't supposed to be in first?" Natalie scoffed with a shrug. "He belongs wherever his class of ticket puts him." Jenna hesitated, her lips parting as if to argue, but thought better of it. In 19B, Walter rested his cane across his lap and turned his face toward the window. The demotion wasn't about distance. It was about message, a silent decree. You don't belong here. His knees ached from the abrupt walk. His pride throbbed far deeper. But he asked for nothing, said nothing, let the silence swallow him. Everyone else did, too. Everyone except one. Jenna, the same attendant, passed slowly, her gaze catching the white-knuckled way Walter gripped the armrest. She paused, uncertain whether to say anything. Before she could, a voice rang through the cabin like a siren. "Mr. Briggs." Natalie's voice cracked the quiet, sharp and echoing. Walter turned. She stood 2 rows away, flanked now by 2 uniformed ground crew members in reflective vests. "We need you to come with us," she said, her tone stripped of courtesy now, all steel and scrutiny. Walter blinked once, then raised his eyes to hers. "You already reassigned me." "I'm seated, ma'am. Is there a further issue?" His voice was calm, but carried the weight of withheld frustration. Natalie stepped forward, abandoning any trace of professionalism. "You were never cleared to board under a first-class designation," she announced loudly, drawing the attention of passengers. "There are concerns about the validity of your ID and booking. We'll need you to exit for additional verification." The 2 crewmen behind her shifted uncomfortably, prepared to act. "That won't be necessary," Walter replied, his grip tightening slightly around his cane. "My documents are in order. My ticket is valid. You're welcome to check it again." "Sir," she snapped, cutting him off, "you're now refusing a crew directive. If we escalate this, it becomes a federal matter." Murmurs broke out across the cabin. A teenager angled her phone just right, capturing the scene on video. A man, 2 rows back, leaned toward his wife. What the hell is happening? Still seated, Walter remained motionless. "I'm not refusing," he said. "I'm asking for clarification before being removed a second time." Natalie took a step closer. Her face hovered inches from his now. "You don't get to question flight authority," she whispered with a venomous sneer. "You either walk off this plane, or we drag you." She turned to the crewman. "Remove him." The younger of the 2 hesitated. "Ma'am, he's clearly elderly." "Then do it gently," she said, voice flat. Reluctantly, they stepped forward. One reached for Walter's elbow, the other for his bag. The moment their hands touched him, Walter flinched, not in resistance but from a reflex born of old injuries. His cane slipped from his lap and clattered onto the floor. His right leg gave out slightly, and he sank halfway down with a soft grunt of pain. Gasps echoed in the cabin. "Someone help him!" A voice called from behind. "Are you seeing this?" another whispered. Walter tried to rise, but the awkward angle and the weight of hands on him made it worse. His balance faltered, shoulders hunched low. Natalie didn't blink. "Keep him moving," she said coldly. "We don't have time for dramatics." His cane struck the floor with a metallic clatter, the sound slicing through the hushed cabin. Walter Briggs' right leg buckled, and he crumpled onto one knee with a quiet, pained grunt. Gasps rippled through the rows. "Jesus," someone murmured. "Help him," another voice snapped from behind. Walter tried to push himself upright, but the grip on his arms threw off his balance. His body trembled under the strain, his joints stiff, the position unforgiving. Natalie Cross didn't flinch. "Keep moving," she said coldly, as if watching someone collapse wasn't out of the ordinary. "We don't have time for this." From halfway down the cabin, Jenna Hale pushed through a cluster of passengers. "Stop!" she cried, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "You're hurting him!" Natalie spun around, her face snapping into something sharp. "This isn't your responsibility," she hissed. "Step back, or I'll have to report you for interference." Jenna froze, stunned by the threat. Her hands shook slightly at her sides. From the front of the plane, another voice rose, this time louder. "Hey, I'm filming this. He didn't do anything wrong." A man stood halfway into the aisle, phone lifted high, recording. Natalie's head jerked toward him. "Sir," she barked, "recording during an in-flight safety issue violates airline policy. I need you to hand over that phone immediately." The man didn't budge. "You're making a mistake," he said firmly. "You can't treat someone like this and expect no one to notice." Natalie advanced on him, reaching out, but he recoiled, tucking the phone to his chest. "Touch me again," he warned, "and I'll be calling my lawyer." For a moment, something flickered across her face. Panic? Calculation? But it was gone just as quickly. "Security will meet you at the gate if you continue to interfere," she said, sliding back into her professional mask. Then she turned away and marched back to Walter. He was being hoisted to his feet now, his frame sagging under the weight of humiliation. The two crewmen tried to support him, but each step was slow and uneven. Every breath he took seemed heavier than the last. No one spoke. Some passengers filmed discreetly behind their trays. Others looked away, as though silence might shield them from complicity. Jenna Hale stood frozen near the curtain, biting her lip until it nearly broke. Her fists clenched tight. "Where are you taking him?" she asked, voice trembling. Natalie didn't answer. She simply motioned forward. The crewmen guided Walter down the aisle. No apology, no explanation, just policy, cold and merciless. The passengers parted around him like a tide around driftwood, giving space but offering nothing else. Not a hand, not a word, not until it was far too late. As Walter reached the edge of the first-class curtain, his cane trailed behind him like a forgotten relic. He mumbled something, soft, almost to himself. "I didn't think we were still here." By the time they reached a cramped seat near the back, Natalie was gone, her expression satisfied, her duty done. Whether she understood the gravity of what she had set into motion was unclear. Perhaps she didn't care. The younger of the two crewmen helped Walter into the seat. "We're sorry, sir," he whispered gently. Walter didn't respond. His eyes were glazed from the effort it took to keep from shaking. He stared at the floor. The cane had been returned to him, but now it rested across his lap like something symbolic, no longer a tool, but a reminder. He clutched it, his hands trembling, trying to steady himself. The stale scent of disinfectant drifted from the nearby lavatory, sterile and sour. Around him, passengers resumed pretending nothing had happened. A businessman, one row ahead, lowered his gaze when Walter looked up. A teen nearby, earbuds in, had recorded the incident and quietly airdropped it to someone. He chuckled under his breath while typing the caption. No one asked if he was okay. No one offered him a drink. No one, except one. A boy, no older than 7, turned around in the seat ahead. His small curls bounced slightly as he leaned over the top of the headrest. "Sir?" the boy asked, voice small, eyes wide with confusion. "Why were they mean to you?" Walter blinked. The question caught him off guard. He looked at the child, really looked, and saw something rare. Innocence untainted. Curiosity, not judgment. After a pause, Walter offered a tired, almost imperceptible smile. "It's not the first time someone's pulled me away from something I paid for," he said quietly, voice rough with memory. "But it never hurts any less." The boy tilted his head, not quite understanding. Still, he nodded like he did. "You want my window seat?" he asked with pure sincerity. "My dad says I always fall asleep anyway." Walter chuckled, just a breath of laughter. "No, thank you," he murmured. "That's kind of you." And with that, the child turned back around, unaware of the way his small gesture had shifted something. Just a little. Walter chuckled gently. "No, thank you. That's very kind of you." Before anything more could pass between them, the boy's mother reached up and tugged him back into his seat. She whispered something harsh into his ear, too low to hear but sharp enough to sting. She never looked back at Walter, just adjusted her scarf and slipped, like the others, into practiced silence. Walter exhaled deeply, sinking into the stiff seat that barely accommodated his frame. His knees pressed against the tray, his shoulder brushing strangers each time the lavatory door swung open. He didn't flinch. He'd been through worse. He'd walked avenues where leashed dogs were given more courtesy than men like him. This was just a new version of the same old exclusion. But his silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Then, movement in the aisle. Avery Lind, a flight attendant barely a year into her career with Altura Air, knelt beside him. She wasn't naive, but she still believed in things like fairness and human decency, virtues that seemed misplaced in the cold mechanics of airline corporate culture. She pretended to check the emergency kit, her voice low beneath the drone of the engine. "Mr. Briggs?" she asked gently. Walter turned, cautious but not closed. I wanted to say," she continued, hesitating, "what happened to you back there wasn't right." Walter studied her, eyes that looked both tired and brave. "You saw it all?" She nodded. "Every moment, even before they dragged you from the seat. You were calm, respectful, and she paused, glancing toward the front of the plane. "Natalie's always like that. People don't stop her because she's protected. A friend of someone in operations, high up." Walter said nothing at first. Then, softly, "And you? Are you afraid?" Avery's gaze didn't drop. She held it, steady but heavy. "Yes," she admitted. "But I'm more tired of watching this happen than I'm scared of saying something." A long silence lingered between them. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a bottle of water, and slid it into the side pouch of his seat without another word. Then she stood, glanced once more down the aisle, and said under her breath, "I can't fix this, but I think someone like you might." And with that, she slipped back into the aisle, vanishing behind the curtain like she had never knelt there at all. Walter watched her go, something shifting in his expression. His eyes narrowed just slightly, as if he was solving a puzzle, or recognizing one that had already been solved. Up front, in the dim glow between the first-class galley and the service curtain, Avery Lind stood alone, earpiece pressed tight as chatter crackled through the crew comms. Mostly routine. Turbulence updates, beverage inventory, arrival time. Then a voice she knew far too well cut through. "Captain Reynolds. Just a heads up," he said, drawling with mock casualness. "Heard we had a little seating confusion earlier. What was it? Some old guy thought he was royalty or something?" A pause. Then came Natalie's voice, icy and theatrical. Poor man looked like he'd just stepped off a greyhound, barely holding himself together. Walked into 1A like he owned the plane. Captain Reynolds laughed, full-throated and unfiltered. "Yeah, these older brown folks always think a ticket and a smile buys 'em champagne and silverware. Somebody's got to remind them this isn't fantasy land." Avery went rigid. The color drained from her face. She reached up and yanked the earpiece out, her fingers trembling. Her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Behind her, the illusion of luxury hummed on. First-class passengers sipped wine, browsed devices, their comfort untouched by cruelty. Willfully or otherwise. Farther up in seat C2A, Daniel Mercer, an investment strategist who spent more time in the sky than on the ground, adjusted his cuffs and shifted in his chair. He'd witnessed the scene earlier, the demotion, the whispers, the wait, and, though he hadn't spoken, it had gnawed at him. Now, as Natalie Cross glided down the aisle, he leaned forward slightly and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, voice quiet but firm. "That gentleman earlier, the one you moved. What exactly happened?" "Excuse me," Daniel Mercer said, his voice low but firm. "That gentleman, the one seated near the back now, what happened?" Natalie Cross paused mid-step. Her head turned and her face broke into a smile that never quite touched her eyes. "Oh, him?" she said lightly, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "There was a ticketing mix-up, a system reassignment. Happens from time to time." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Is that right?" Because from where I sat, he looked like he was in the right seat. Natalie tilted her head, playing at charm. "Sir, we handle hundreds of travelers daily. If he were really a first-class guest, I'd have known his name." Daniel's jaw tensed. "First-class material," he echoed, the words carrying a cool edge. Natalie caught herself, then forced a laugh. No offense meant, of course. "We just have our regulars, business elites, platinum tiers. You get a feel for who fits where." Daniel didn't smile. "I didn't realize decency now came with a tier system." Their eyes locked, silent tension hanging between them. Then, without another word, Natalie turned and walked away, her posture as pristine as ever. Daniel, expression hardening, pulled out his phone. He opened the Altura Air Elite feedback portal, a back door only top-tier passengers could access, and began typing with swift, decisive fingers. Toward the rear, Walter Briggs remained still. Despite the cramped seat and aching joints, his back stayed straight, his hands folded calmly over the top of his cane. The boy in front of him had long since fallen asleep, head tilted to the side. The squeak of the nearby lavatory door had become little more than background noise. But Walter wasn't focused on that. His eyes, angled just slightly, caught the reflection in the plane window. Avery Lind, standing at the edge of the curtain, still as stone, her face unreadable. Something in her posture said she was listening, closely. Then came the chime of the overhead speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, beverage service will now begin in the rear cabin." The routine returned. Snack carts rolled, voices lifted again in casual chatter. The injustice began to fade into the background. Just another buried moment at cruising altitude. Back in the front galley, Natalie Cross returned with a light smirk curling at her lips. She passed Jenna Hale, who was restocking cups near the service cart. "Our little rebellion still sulking back there?" Natalie teased, tossing the words over her shoulder. Jenna didn't reply. Her hands kept moving, calm and mechanical. Natalie leaned in closer. "You really want to risk your job for someone like him?" she whispered. Jenna's eyes narrowed. "Someone like who?" Natalie didn't answer. She just rolled her eyes and swept past the curtain, disappearing again into first class. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds leaned back in his chair, headset tilted casually. He reached for his coffee and radioed ground control. "Altura 928. On course, smooth skies, no reported issues," he said. But as he pulled his hand back, a small notification pinged on the console. A priority alert from a secure executive channel. He blinked. That line almost never activated in flight. Not unless something serious had occurred. He tapped it. A short message scrolled across the screen. "Immediate status review. Passenger 1A. His smirk vanished. Captain Reynolds reached again for the intercom selector, his movement slower now, unease prickling the edges of his confidence. Outside the cockpit windows, clouds streaked by in soft motion. The aircraft coasted smoothly over the Midwest, quiet, calm, steady. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Not turbulence, but tension. Only the observant could feel it. And those paying attention knew something was coming. Natalie, still flush with control, made her way toward the rear once more. Her heels clicked sharply across the carpet as she moved with renewed certainty, invincibility etched into her stride. She stopped again beside Walter, now seated in 35F, still and silent, his cane like a drawn line of restraint resting across his lap. "Sir," she began, her voice raised just enough to be heard by nearby rows, "I need to perform a security check on your carry-on. Routine protocol." Walter turned slowly, his brows furrowed, not in anger, but in disbelief. "Is there a reason?" he asked quietly. "You've moved me from my seat. You've questioned my credentials. And now you want to search my personal belongings?" "You've reassigned my seat," Walter Briggs said, voice calm but firm. "You've questioned my identity. And now you want to go through my belongings?" Natalie Cross offered a smile that never made it to her eyes. "It's standard protocol, Mr. Briggs. You've already been flagged for abnormal boarding activity. Cooperation ensures safety for everyone on board." She didn't wait for permission. Without warning, she crouched, yanked his leather bag from beneath the seat, and unzipped it with a rough motion. The flap flew open, and its contents spilled out into the aisle. Walter stiffened. Onto the threadbare carpet tumbled an old velvet case containing a fountain pen, a pair of time-worn gloves, a polished brass pocket watch engraved with careful initials, and a bundle of yellowed documents bound in a ribbon that had seen better days. Natalie sifted through the items carelessly, showing no reverence. She lifted a faded photograph, black and white, showing a younger Walter beside a smiling woman, both dressed in classic post-war fashion, standing proudly on courthouse steps. She scoffed. "Vintage romance," she said aloud, loud enough to earn a few uneasy chuckles from nearby passengers who weren't sure if they were supposed to laugh. Then she pulled out something that made Walter's breath catch, a sealed golden envelope, thick, embossed, clearly important. The color drained slightly from his face. "Please," he said, urgency tightening his voice. "That envelope is confidential." Natalie turned it in her fingers with disinterest, as if it were nothing more than a discarded receipt. "This?" she said, raising it between two fingers like trash. "Doesn't look like much." She examined the seal with a smirk, then turned slightly and waved it toward the passengers seated behind her. "Let me guess. Some fantasy inheritance? Maybe a fake property deed to impress the front row?" Her voice carried a cruel amusement, laced with mockery. Walter didn't move, but his hands gripped the edge of his pants so tightly the fabric bunched beneath his knuckles. "That's not yours to handle," he said, lower now, but every word struck like a gavel. Natalie just shrugged. Without another glance, she strutted to the rear of the cabin, where she theatrically lifted the bin lid near the waste compartment and dropped the envelope inside with a deliberate snap. "Well," she said, brushing her hands off, "if it mattered that much, you wouldn't have buried it under a pile of flea market keepsakes." Then she turned back toward the aisle, nudging one of Walter's scattered items with the toe of her shoe. "You can put that back yourself." From the curtain near the economy galley, Avery Lynn stood frozen, Her fingers gripped the side of the beverage cart so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Behind her, Jenna Hale had just emerged from the crew channel corridor, having heard the entire interaction unfold through her earpiece. She threw it away. Jenna whispered, her voice hollow. "That envelope?" It looked official. Avery didn't answer. She couldn't. She was watching Walter. He had begun to pick up his belongings slowly, one at a time. There was a reverence in his movements, like he was reassembling the shattered remains of something sacred. His hands trembled, but he said nothing. No complaint, no accusation. Even as he reached the end and realized the golden envelope was gone, he simply closed the zipper on the now lighter bag and returned it to its place under the seat. He sat back, cane across his lap, and took a slow, shallow breath. But something in his gaze had changed. His eyes, once tired, had narrowed. The exhaustion hadn't vanished, but behind it now burned something else, something sharper, more focused. The room around him, once filled with idle ignorance, had grown noticeably quieter. Even the boy who had spoken to him earlier now sat motionless, confused, clinging to his mother's arm. She, like the rest, kept her eyes forward, avoiding his completely. Natalie, smug and victorious, glided down the aisle once again. She straightened trays and tidied napkins as though she hadn't just discarded something irreplaceable. To her, it had all been part of the routine. A minor disruption, a forgettable face. Meanwhile, up front in the cockpit, Captain Reynolds had just received another alert. This one flashing red across his panel. He squinted. This wasn't routine. It required a biometric clearance. He retrieved his ID token, pressed it to the reader, and waited as the system scanned. 2 words appeared on the screen. Priority, override, Briggs. The air in the cabin hadn't shifted, but the energy had. Something had broken. Not turbulence, but pressure. A taut wire of tension now stretched across the walls of Flight 928, quiet but unmistakable. Captain Reynolds stared at the screen again. His fingers hovered over the comm switch, suddenly unsure. His certainty, so steady moments ago, now frayed at the edges. Outside, the sky remained peaceful. Inside, something was unraveling. The envelope was gone. The insult had been dealt, the laughter had faded, but the fire it sparked had not. Avery Lind walked slowly down the aisle again, not with urgency, but with weight. The burden of everything she'd witnessed pressed heavily against her chest. She knelt beside Walter Briggs, as if kneeling beside something sacred that had just been broken. "Sir," she said softly, her voice trembling just above the hum of the aircraft. "I'm sorry. That wasn't right. None of this is." Walter didn't turn to her right away. He simply exhaled. Slow, long, steady. Then his head shifted slightly, eyes meeting hers. They weren't angry, but they weren't tired either. Not anymore. There was something darker behind them, measured, controlled. "You think this is about a seat?" he asked, voice gravelly at the edges but solid. Avery shook her head. "No, He raised a hand, not to silence her, but to slow time itself. "You don't know what you've stepped into, child," he whispered. "You think you're working for a company that sells tickets, but what you don't see is what moves above the seats, above the uniforms, above all this polished theater." His voice wasn't harsh, it was final, like a key turning in a lock that hadn't moved in years. Avery's breath hitched. She wanted to ask what he meant, but a soft rustle in the aisle pulled her attention away. A woman in her mid-60s walked past in a crisp lavender blouse and a strand of pearls. She had the composed air of someone who flew first class by default, but her pace faltered the moment she saw Walter. Her brow furrowed, her steps slowed, her eyes narrowed, scanning his face with surgical memory. Then she reached out gently and tapped her husband's arm. "Frank," she whispered. "That man, the one near the window." Her husband, a broad-shouldered man in a navy blazer, leaned in. "What is it, Lorraine?" She pointed, barely. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "That's Walter Elias Briggs, the man who built Valerian Holdings from the ground up, the founder, the one who disappeared after the board tried to edge him out." Frank squinted, unsure. She looked at him incredulously. "It's him. I've seen him in Forbes, in legacy interviews. That's him." Frank turned again, this time more slowly. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He remembered now. The stillness, the eyes, the quiet command that never needed volume. Back in the galley, Natalie Cross chuckled over a text message on her device. That smugness didn't last long. Jenna Hale stepped into the galley behind her, her posture stiff, her jaw locked tight. "You just went through the luggage of a legend," Jenna said, her voice low but sharp. "You threw away a sealed legal document that probably belonged to the man who signed your first paycheck." Natalie glanced up, confused. "What are you talking about?" Jenna took a step closer. "That man's name isn't just Walter Briggs. His full name is Walter Elias Briggs. He was on your company's board. He founded Valerian Holdings, the parent company that owns Altura Air." Natalie blinked once, then she scoffed. "Even if that were true, he sure doesn't look like it anymore." Jenna's jaw clenched. "Maybe that's the point," she said. "Maybe he wanted to see how people behave when they think power has no face." In the rear of the plane, Walter watched Avery rise to her feet again, still visibly shaken, torn between protocol and conscience. She lingered a moment longer, then gently placed her hand over his. "What do I do?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Walter looked at her, his expression calm but unwavering. "Listen to me, young lady," he said. "Don't tell anyone else what you think you figured out." "Not yet." She blinked. Why not? Because the moment they realize they've wronged someone with power, they don't apologize. They bury it. They cover it up. Let them finish digging the hole. I'll be waiting at the bottom. She nodded once, heart pounding in her chest, and stepped away. Her feet were unsteady, her hands still shaking. Up front, Captain Reynolds stood in the galley, staring at his personal flight tablet. The alert still blinked. Priority, override. Briggs silent protocol, status active. He scrolled down and paused when the system loaded a grainy black and white image, captured from a cabin surveillance feed, showing Walter being escorted by ground crew. The recognition hit him like a slap. He didn't move. This wasn't just unusual. This was corporate-level activation. This was a shift, and they were already flying through it. On the cockpit screen, the grainy surveillance footage played on loop. Walter Briggs, steady but weathered, being escorted down the aisle by uniformed ground staff. Next to it, a pulsing red banner flashed with stark clarity. "Do not engage until ground instruction." Captain Reynolds stared at the alert, jaw tight, pulse ticking beneath his collar. This wasn't just outside his authority. This was deep architecture, the kind of executive protocol whispered about behind locked boardroom doors. The kind that came with signed NDAs and black sedans waiting just beyond restricted airspace. He sat in stunned silence, one hand gripping his tablet, the other hovering just above the intercom switch. The warning on the screen glowed brighter now. Priority, override, Walter Elias Briggs, Board Executive, Principal Shareholder, Protocol Delta Alpha. Active, Reynolds hesitated for only a breath before tapping the toggle for direct ground communication. His voice, typically full of bravado, dropped into something quieter. Uncertain. Tower, this is Altura 928. We're confirming visual ID match for Delta Alpha Protocol. Requesting instruction. There was a brief pause, static flickering in the headset. Then a clipped voice replied, sharp and unmistakably high level. Confirmation received. Immediate recognition required. Execute via flight crew. No discretion allowed. This wasn't guidance. It was a mandate. Reynolds swallowed. Then he reached over, flipped the intercom selector to cabin-wide, and pressed the mic. Back in seat 35F, Walter Briggs remained motionless. His hands were folded calmly over his cane, his eyes closed, not in rest but in measured expectation. His chest rose and fell with the ease of someone who had waited a long time for this exact moment. Near the galley, Avery Lynn stood frozen beside Jenna Hale, both watching the captain through a narrow slit in the curtain as he leaned in toward the mic. In the aisle, Natalie Cross chirped out her usual performance as she passed drinks and fake smiles to unsuspecting passengers in row 4, completely unaware that the moment she had been so carelessly writing with her arrogance had arrived. A low crackle broke over the cabin speakers. Then came Captain Reynolds's voice, clear, practiced, but now with something strained just beneath the surface. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is your captain speaking. Thank you for choosing Altura Air. We are currently cruising at 38,000 feet, on time for our scheduled arrival into New York." There was a pause, long enough for Avery's stomach to twist. Then he continued, slower this time, deliberate. "We also have the unique honor today of welcoming a very special guest on board. Please join us in offering our respect and recognition to Mr. Walter Elias Briggs, former CEO of Valerian Holdings and newly appointed principal owner of Altura Air." For a moment, the entire aircraft seemed to forget how to breathe. A silence swept from the cockpit to the tail like a wave, crashing through rows and trays and earbuds and phones. Forks froze midair. Conversations died in half-spoken thoughts. Then heads began to turn, one by one, toward the back of the plane, toward seat 35F, toward the man who had just been mocked, relocated, searched, and humiliated. The man they now knew owned the very sky they were flying through. Natalie Cross dropped the tray in her hands with a dull thud, the orange juice splashing into the aisle. Her face drained of color, her mouth slightly open, the words echoing inside her head. Walter Elias Briggs. At the galley, Avery's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes welled with tears. She didn't hide them. Beside her, Jenna whispered under her breath, voice shaking. He knew. She blinked hard, eyes fixed toward the back. He knew this whole time. In his seat, Walter opened his eyes. The silence didn't unsettle him. He had known it was coming. He didn't rise. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. He simply turned his head toward the window, letting the attention wash over him like morning sun. The corner of his mouth lifted, not in pride, not in smugness, just quiet confirmation. A man who understood the value of timing. Around him, the murmurs began again, confusion giving way to realization. A man near the front pulled out his earbuds. "Wait, that was him?" he whispered. A woman 2 rows back sat upright in her seat, heart racing. Passengers across the plane looked at one another, unsure how to process what they'd witnessed. and what they had ignored. And Walter, he simply waited, because he knew. The truth was just beginning to land. A woman in business class stood abruptly, craning her neck to get a clear look down the aisle. Her voice rose in a stunned whisper. The founder of Valerian. I thought he'd retired. I thought he was dead. Further back, in row 11, Lorraine gripped her husband's hand tightly. I knew it, she breathed. I told you that was him. Frank, still staring straight ahead, could only nod, shocked into silence. Meanwhile, Natalie Cross was retreating toward the galley, each step unsteady. Her eyes locked onto the figure in 35F. No longer just an elderly man, but a shadowed presence with gravity she hadn't understood until it was too late. For the first time since takeoff, her usual armor of control fractured. She wasn't confused about what had happened. She was terrified about what might still come. Jenna Hale was the first to act. She slipped through the curtain into the rear galley, eyes brimming with quiet reverence. She knelt beside Walter, her voice low. Mr. Briggs, is there anything I can get for you? He shook his head gently. I have what I need, he said, just above a whisper. Let the rest come on its own. Then Avery Lynn stepped forward, still visibly shaken, wiping tears from her cheeks. Sir, I didn't know. I should have... She started. Walter looked at her. His gaze was kind but unflinching. You saw me, he said. That's enough. The cabin still hummed with murmurs, the tension crawling up every aisle, when Walter reached slowly into the inner pocket of his coat. He pulled out a phone, plain, matte black, unbranded, almost outdated in appearance. But there was something weighty about it, not flashy, just authoritative. He unlocked it with a thumbprint and tapped a single app, a gold icon with no label. The screen lit up, a secure interface no one else on the flight would recognize. Not public tech, not even standard executive. He scrolled through a list of entries with calm, deliberate fingers. Then, he raised the phone to his ear and spoke clearly but softly. I need a complete behavioral report on Natalie Cross, he said. Pull every passenger complaint, every crew report, flight log, and note from the last 90 days. Flag for conduct violations, service discrepancies, and racial incident markers. He paused, then added, cross-reference with entries from Jenna Hale and Avery Lind. Package the findings for HR and the COO. I want it in their hands within the hour. No confirmation. No response. The call ended itself. Even the plane seemed quieter after that. At the front of the aircraft, Captain Reynolds stared at his display screen, still locked onto the alert from moments earlier. Then a new message flashed. Bright amber. Command protocol engaged Flight Commander Reynolds. Authority relinquished temporary control. Transferred to Co-Pilot Harris Executive Override W.E. Briggs. His blood went cold. He reached instinctively for the manual override panel, but it was already sealed, requiring a biometric key far above his clearance. Another message followed immediately. Do not attempt public clarification. Comply passively. Escalation review in progress. He turned slowly to Co-Pilot Harris, whose expression matched his own. Half disbelief, half dawning clarity. You saw it, right? Reynolds muttered, his voice hollow. Harris nodded. They're not asking, he said quietly. They're telling. Back in the main cabin, passengers watched as Natalie Cross' hands hovered over the beverage cart, now completely still. The cheery mask she had worn so effortlessly was gone. In its place, wide eyes, a paling face, and fingers trembling over the controls. Her tablet, which had earlier been buzzing with routine pings, now vibrated steadily with high-priority alerts. She picked it up with shaking hands. One new notification flashed red across the screen. Conduct audit initiated. Subject cross, Natalie status, active investigation access level, limited all interactions now being recorded. Below that, another instruction blinked, remain in place, await formal briefing upon landing. She backed away from the cart as if it had just burst into flames. Her eyes darted from row to row, searching for some kind of exit that didn't exist. But there was none. Not at 38,000 feet. Meanwhile, Walter Briggs hadn't moved. His presence was still and centered, like a pillar rooted deep in the earth. Eyes calm, posture unchanged. But no one could ignore him now. Walter Briggs sat motionless, hands folded over his cane once more, eyes not fixed on anyone but on something far beyond the confines of the plane, a gaze that had seen boardrooms implode, corporations crumble, and legacies rewritten without warning, and had outlasted them all. In the rear galley, Jenna Hale returned, clutching a tablet that buzzed with updates she technically wasn't supposed to access. "They're auditing every flight she's worked since January," she whispered to Avery Lind, who hovered behind her. Her thumb hovered over the screen. 5 passenger complaints were buried, 1 flagged for hostile conduct, another for document tampering. Avery's face paled. Her voice came out soft, disbelieving. How? How did none of that reach corporate? Jenna turned to look toward Walter's seat. "Because until now," she said, "no one who mattered was watching." At the front of the plane, Daniel Mercer, the sharply dressed VIP from seat 2A, stood from his aisle seat. He adjusted his cufflinks and smoothed his tie as he approached the rear, his steps measured and full of quiet remorse. He reached Walter's row and stopped with respectful distance. "Mr. Briggs," he began, his voice steady, "I owe you an apology." Walter looked up. His face was unreadable. "I didn't recognize you," Daniel continued, "and I didn't act when I should have. I saw what happened and I stayed seated. I told myself it wasn't my place." Walter studied him for a long moment. "You saw what you were trained to ignore," he said evenly. "That's how the system is built. It makes injustice feel like policy, and policy feel like silence." Daniel nodded, chastened. "If there's anything I can do to support what comes next." Walter lifted a hand slightly. Just a small gesture. "You've already started," he said. "You stopped being silent 10 minutes ago. That's more than most." Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Reynolds unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped aside as co-pilot Harris slid into the pilot's chair. The transition was wordless, seamless, mechanically routine, but symbolically it was seismic. A captain surrendering command mid-flight was practically unheard of. The aircraft began its descent toward JFK International. A soft pressure shift rolled through the cabin, and the windows vibrated faintly with altitude change. But there was no idle chatter, no sighs of return, no clinking glasses of wine. The cabin was silent, not out of exhaustion, but out of awakening. Eyes slowly turned toward the back of the plane, toward Walter Briggs, seated still in his corner like a sovereign draped in humility, watching everything unfold with the calm of someone who had seen this kind of reckoning take shape before. Phones buzzed quietly. Articles began surfacing mid-flight. Walter Elias Briggs, silent executive behind Valerian Holdings, identified mid-flight on Altura. Air founder demoted mid-air before airline execs triggered emergency override, passengers opened tabs, searched names, cross-checked images. Some were stunned, others ashamed. But all were changed. The cabin mood shifted from whispered intrigue to something sharper, collective recognition. They had witnessed a public humiliation against a man who owned the silence that followed. In the front galley, Natalie Cross slouched against a side panel, her body locked in denial and dread. Her crew tablet, once a steady flow of service alerts and routine updates, now displayed a flashing warning overlay, white text pulsing against a red screen. Off-boarding protocol activated employee, under investigation, mandatory personnel, escort required upon arrival. She tapped frantically at the display, trying to override the lockout. Each touch was met with an error chime. Her hands trembled. Just feet away, Captain Reynolds leaned against the bulkhead, his authority stripped, his face drawn. He didn't speak to her. She didn't ask for help. In row 1, Daniel Mercer returned to his seat, jaw tight, eyes forward, staring now not at the clouds but inward, thinking about what it meant to speak too late. At the back, Avery stared down at her crew tablet. A new feed had just gone live, a secure channel marked for internal review. The footage was already being compiled. Natalie rummaging through Walter's luggage, her fingers on the sealed envelope, her words, every second captured, archived, shared with legal. Jenna leaned in. They found the envelope, she whispered. The cleaning crew flagged it, still sealed. Avery's eyes closed in silent relief, then opened with new focus. The moment the cleaning crew confirmed the sealed envelope had been retrieved from the aft galley's trash compartment, Avery Lynn let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her fingers hovered over her tablet as Jenna Hale showed her the next alert. HR's flagged it, Jenna whispered. Internal hearing scheduled. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. Immediate suspension recommended. Just then, Walter Briggs adjusted in his seat, ever so slightly, as co-pilot Harris's voice came calmly over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight deck. We are now making our final approach into New York. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened as we prepare for landing. The irony of the scripted airline pleasantries wasn't lost on a single soul aboard Flight 928. The wheels lowered with a steady mechanical thud, and the aircraft eased onto the tarmac, touching down with a gentle jolt. But instead of turning toward Orion Terminal, the aircraft veered toward a private ramp. It was the business elite in the first few rows who noticed first. Wait, we're not at the main terminal, someone whispered. That's not Gate 14. Walter said nothing. He simply observed through the window as the plane slowed to a crawl. Two sleek black sedans waited alongside a marked security vehicle. One sedan bore the gold crest of Valerian Global. At the base of the stairway ramp, 3 individuals stood. A woman in a tailored navy suit with a badge reading Legal Affairs, a bespectacled man holding a compliance tablet, and a man with a discreet broadcast mic clipped to his collar, flanked by a handheld film crew. The second, the aircraft came to a complete stop. The lead flight attendant approached the door without waiting for a gate signal and whispered under his breath, "Jet bridge, bypass authorized. Never seen that before." Necks craned from every row as the stairway rolled into place. But no passengers were allowed to disembark, not yet. Instead, an airport security officer stepped on board and walked with purpose toward the front galley. He stopped directly in front of Natalie Cross. "Ms. Cross," he said quietly but firmly, "you're being escorted from this aircraft under Executive Order 12.7. Please remove your badge and step forward." Natalie blinked. Her feet froze in place. "Wait. What?" she stammered. "You can't just—" But before she could finish, the man from compliance stepped onto the plane, raising his tablet and nodding toward co-pilot Harris. "This is active enforcement," he said, "under executive oversight. This doesn't pass through standard HR." The cameraman lifted his lens. Natalie's voice spiked. "You're filming this? This isn't protocol. This is humiliation." The woman from Legal Affairs stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Correction, Ms. Cross," she said coolly. "What happened in this cabin 5 hours ago? That was humiliation. This is transparency." She handed her the clipboard. "You are hereby placed under temporary administrative separation. Your credentials are revoked. Please return your issued device." Cornered and trembling, Natalie handed over her locked crew tablet and slowly unpinned her name badge. She turned once, just once, to scan the faces of the passengers, searching for a shred of sympathy. None came. Then she was led off the aircraft, every second captured by the quiet hiss of the camera rolling behind her. From the curtain, Jenna Hale stood stunned. Avery slowly sat down in the jump seat, head bowed, her heart thudding like a drum. And somewhere behind them, a whisper broke the silence. "They're gonna post that clip, aren't they?" They did, before the seatbelt light was even off. A shaky, vertical video shot by the teenage girl in seat 19A hit the internet within 12 minutes of touchdown. The video showed Natalie Cross, hands on her hips, barking orders at Walter Briggs, then rifling through his personal bag. The views hit 300,000 by the half-hour mark. Within 1 hour, the hashtags began trending. Justice for Walter, the man who owned the aisle. They didn't know he built. And another video, live-streamed by a bystander, showed Natalie in tears being escorted down the aircraft stairway. And still another, just a photo this time, captured Walter sitting calmly with his cane, overlaid with the now viral caption, "They tried to drag him down. They didn't know he built the floor." News anchors scrambled to confirm the identity of the man whose quiet resolve had rippled into a national reckoning. Social media lit up with commentaries, think pieces, and reaction videos. Not just about power, but about silence. About how the most powerful man on the plane had spoken without ever raising his voice. Walter Briggs remained in his seat long after the final passenger disembarked. The cabin, once heavy with judgment, now felt strangely light, as if something toxic had finally exhaled. When he finally rose, he took one long look down the aisle that had once felt a mile wide. Then he turned toward the front, cane in hand, where Avery Lynn stood at the threshold, waiting with a silent nod. Outside, the sky over Liberty Field glowed with late afternoon gold. Walter's polished black cane tapped softly against the metal stairway as he descended, each step measured, deliberate. The heat of the tarmac shimmered in waves, but the air around him felt cool, not from weather, but from clarity. At the base of the stairs, Avery stood with her hands clasped tightly, her spine straight, despite the storm still coiled inside her chest. She didn't speak as Walter passed her, and he didn't need words either. He simply nodded once, then walked forward with quiet authority. A black SUV stood waiting just beyond the line of cones. Behind it, under a white canopy that had been erected with uncharacteristic haste, waited a semicircle of reporters, legal counsel, corporate executives, and a podium bearing the Valerian insignia. As Walter approached, the crowd instinctively parted. No one had to tell them who he was anymore. They weren't parting for a man with a title. They were parting for a man who had just shown the world what happens when power chooses silence, until it doesn't. The murmurs vanished the moment he reached the mic. Flashbulbs burst. Live feeds went live. Phones tilted upward. Every eye locked on the man who had, without raising his voice, grounded a legacy. He didn't look toward the execs. He didn't acknowledge the journalists. He looked past them, to the airport workers standing behind the barrier, to the young flight attendants who had dared to witness, to the janitors who had stepped out from the terminal, uncertain if they were allowed to be there. Then Walter Briggs spoke. "This morning," he began, voice calm, "I boarded a plane under a name that no one bothered to recognize." He let that hang. And that was intentional. I wasn't flying to make a point. I was flying to observe. I wanted to see what kind of world existed when the logos were gone, when the title wasn't announced at the gate. Reporters leaned forward. Phones zoomed in. What I found, Walter said, was something many already know, but very few in my position ever have to feel. Discrimination isn't always loud, he continued. Sometimes it's procedural, polite, hidden in digital errors and seat reassignments, dressed in professionalism, but it's still cut from the same cloth as cruelty. He paused, not for applause, just to let truth echo. The difference, he said, between being quietly dismissed and being quietly remembered is what you do next. From his coat, Walter pulled a second envelope, identical in color to the one that had been discarded hours ago. But this one bore a new seal, gold and unmistakable. "Effective immediately," he said, "I am launching the Briggs Horizon Initiative, a multi-million-dollar equity fund focused on aviation, full scholarships, legal protections, leadership training, for the ones who never made it past the interview because someone assumed they didn't belong at 35,000 feet. A ripple of clapping moved through the crowd, small at first, then growing. Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. But Walter didn't smile. He wasn't finished. Additionally, he said, Altura Air's conduct protocols will undergo a full audit, led by an independent board, and any employee found to have twisted policy to justify personal bias will be addressed, not privately, not quietly, publicly. He paused again. Let the echo settle. Because this wasn't just an announcement, it was an aftershock, and the first wave of change had only just landed. There was a beat of silence. Then, from the edge of the press crowd, a reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Briggs," she called, "will you be returning to an executive role?" Walter's expression didn't change. His gaze, calm and unreadable, met hers. "My role," he said, "was never gone. I was simply choosing when to remind people it existed." More camera shutters clicked. A few murmurs broke the stillness. But Walter had already turned, away from the podium and toward the edge of the platform where Avery Lind stood. Her eyes shimmered with tears she didn't try to hide, arms folded tightly across her chest, unsure whether to move. Walter reached into his coat pocket. "Come here," he said quietly. She stepped forward. Carefully, he pulled out a small silver pin, etched with the historic Valerian emblem, a symbol reserved for those who had shaped the skies long before any cabin class had names. "You remember what I told you on the plane?" he asked. She nodded, her throat tight. "The ones who see before the name matters." With reverence, he pinned the crest to her blazer, then whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Start seeing more. And never stop." Social media exploded. The clip of Natalie Cross being escorted down the tarmac surpassed 12 million views by nightfall. Flight attendants past and present stitched reactions. Influencers reposted the speech with the same message. Let them see aviation forums lit up with praise and overdue critique. Even rival airline CEOs issued statements applauding the transparency. College students on scholarship shared stitched clips of Walter's words. One young black girl in Houston filmed a response to his speech. "One day, I'll fly your jet, Mr. Briggs. You gave me permission." That evening, from a dark-paneled office lined with mahogany shelves and a framed blueprint of a Boeing 777, Walter Briggs addressed the world one last time. No script, no teleprompter, just truth. Power, he said, isn't about how loud you speak when people are listening. It's about what you do when no one believes you have it. That's when the truth surfaces. That's when people show you who they really are. He leaned forward, both hands resting on the edge of the desk. His voice, low and ironclad, "And when they do, remember, what's buried in silence doesn't stay buried. Not if you're still breathing. Not if you remember who you are." He looked into the lens with the quiet certainty of a man who had never needed applause, only momentum. To anyone watching, passenger or pilot, student or CEO, remember this. Never judge a man by the seat he's in, especially when it's not your plane. The screen faded to black, and in the stillness that followed, the world listened.